Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first CEP meeting of 2024. Happy New Year to everybody that is in attendance. Obviously the 17th of January. I haven't seen many of you though since the end of last year now. I do have some official bits to go through before we commence with the main agenda. So I'm just going to read out the fire evacuation procedures and some other notes. So there are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through reception and meet in the War Memorial car park. Webcast of meetings. So this meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. And I'll just confirm that we are live. Yes. Microphones. Please can I remind members and officers that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, that you speak directly into your microphone. The microphone stem can be moved so that it is as close to your mouth as possible. And with your mobile phones, please ensure that they are either switched off or turned to silent, please. Thank you very much. So we'll go for apologies for absence and substitutions next. I've got Councillor Eachus is being replaced by Councillor Isaac. Is there any other apologies or changes? No? Fine. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, cheers, Chair. For transparency on agenda item 6, I am the Treasurer of Overton United Football Club and Chairman of the Hampshire Premier Football League. There is an exploration of viability of a half-size pitch in either Oakley or Overton.
Thank you very much. On to number 3 then, urgent matters. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. Is there anything else that anybody else would like to raise as an urgent matter? No. Excellent. And minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November 2023. Are the committee agreed? I've got Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I did send my apologies for the last meeting to both you and to Democratic Services. Obviously, you weren't in attendance, so it didn't get noted because Democratic Services didn't pick it up till the following day. It was quite late in the afternoon. So just if that can be recorded, that I did actually apologise. Cheers.
Yeah, that's fine. If we can just amend them, I'll sign them afterwards. So with the update of obviously Councillor Howard Sorrell being added to the apologies, is everyone else agreed with the minutes? Agreed. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the first item of tonight's agenda then, which is the draft biodiversity strategy. We've got both Rob West and Sue Croker present to present the presentation and to introduce the report. Unfortunately, Councillor Tomlin couldn't be present tonight due to illness, I believe. So, Sue.
Yes, good evening, everyone. For those who I haven't met yet, my name's Sue Croker. I'm the Parks and Street Scene Manager and have an overview over the Natural Environment team, of which Rob West sits as our Principal Ecologist and Biodiversity Officer. So as said, Councillor Tomlin is very sorry for his absence tonight. He is the Cabinet Member for Climate and the Ecological Emergency, so this piece of work fits under his area. So I am here to introduce the presentation on his behalf, and then I'll hand you over to Rob, who will go through it for you. The biodiversity strategy is a key priority for the Council. Since Rob's appointment in May of last year, we've been working on the production of this strategy. And as you know, officers came to CP on the 15th of November to present the process and the scope that we were looking to deliver for the strategy. Tonight, we will show you how that strategy is progressing, including feedback on the comments that were made at the last meeting. Also, the list of principles, objectives and priorities which have been developed in conjunction with partners and others to help guide the strategy. We also are very delighted to show some maps. We've had a new GIS officer appointed recently who is helping to support this work, and we will be demonstrating how the mapping is going to be used to collate the data and provide that evidence that we need, but also to provide a visualisation of the data and how we then will use it to inform action going forward. So on that basis, I will hand over to Rob.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, so firstly, this presentation is in regards to the biodiversity strategy. It's been developed in response initially to the Ecological Emergency Declaration, in which it was a commitment. So we came to CEP on the 15th of November. We presented to you the process we'd gone through, stakeholder engagement side of things, the scope, and we presented to you our principles, our draft long list, if you remember, long list of principles, objectives, priorities and actions. So just as a reminder, that stakeholder engagement included the creation of a biodiversity strategy working group, a stakeholder workshop, questionnaire and members engagement, and the outputs of those were presented in that long list at CEP in November. And you provided feedback at that time. So taken from the minutes of that meeting, just wanted to highlight some of the actions that we've taken as a result of those of that feedback. You stated you wanted to see specific recognition of the Bourne Rivulet Councillor, so that's been included in the river test priority area, and it's going to be explicitly referenced in the summary sheets, which aren't included in this tonight, for the river test. So it was sought from the council to improve strategic working alongside West Berks Council in regard to the River Enbourne. So you'll see actually the River Enbourne is now included as a priority, and we have a priority area for it alongside the River Test and Loddon. It was stated that the presentation was broad in scope and emphasised the need for prioritisation of specific actions. In this resubmission, you'll see that the scope, the priorities, the objectives, etc., have been refined extensively, as promised. So it was stressed the need to protect species with plans on which species would be protected. We identify priority species within the strategy, and we're committing to take an active role, furthermore, in the species recovery strategies led by County Council and by Natural England, and it's one of the key instruments identified in the Environment Act, so we're committing to taking an active role in that as well. So, as Sue mentioned, the strategy is going to include various figures, images, and be designed in alignment with the climate change strategy. So the point here is it's going to look greater than the sum of its parts in the words that you've seen thus far. It's a work in progress. However, one of the maps that will be included, I guess this is the key map, in fact, is ready and shown here. And that basically there to try and represent nature in the borough. It's to try and highlight the diversity of natural features, geology, rivers, and some of the designations as well. We've tried to fade out, you'll notice, because trying to emphasise the fact that although we have a boundary, nature does not. So there we go. We'll have a series of maps that are included in the strategy itself, and in the various summary sheets for the priorities. So moving forward with the principles, with the more refined list. As previously stated, we developed these at the workshop initially and have refined these internally further. And we want to use these to help show our partners and the public that we're treating biodiversity as one of our organisation's top priorities. So, principles are as follows. We're responding to the joint ecological and climate emergencies is a top priority. Adaptability is our watchword. Playing to our strengths and focusing our effort where we can make the most difference. And we're going to continue to take action on our land and properties in order to make a direct impact. Working in partnership with individuals, organisations and communities, setting clear measures of success with targets, frameworks and timeframes, recognising the importance of the Nature Recovery Network, and applying an approach that recognises the importance of nature to our residents. So the objectives, just as a reminder, we frame these by saying by stating what we must do, where we have direct control, and where we can lead, enable, and inspire. We felt this was necessary to make the distinction between what are our statutory duties, what we have to do, but also emphasising that just because we have to do them doesn't mean that we can't maximise their impact. Where we have direct control, and that is essentially where we manage our estate and where we have our corporate policies and processes. And then where we can lead, enable and inspire. So where can we do more? Where can we do more with our community? And all of the objectives are framed that way, but to make them more accessible in the presentation, we've shortened them and into a single list for the presentation. You've seen the way they are framed in the report, however. But just to summarise, our objectives are the delivery of our statutory duties, to influence the local nature recovery strategy and species recovery strategy and protected site strategies, one of the many Environment Act instruments. Maximise the impact of BNG, biodiversity net gain. We want to monitor and report, actively engage in partnerships and provide leadership, support sites of importance for nature conservation designation, that's our local designation for nature, support local plan production, declare local nature reserves, ensure biodiversity is a corporate consideration, manage our estate to promote biodiversity, promote access to nature, maintain biodiversity data, deliver biodiversity-related enforcement, develop engagement plans, identify priority people, and identify priority species, support green investment in the borough, support communities, help re-nature gardens, and explore solutions for the utilisation of arisings. So our priorities, so these are our features, our species, our habitats that we feel are the things that we want to focus our efforts on to ensure that our impact is as effective as possible. There are also tools for our monitoring as well. So they'll be key in allowing us to track progress of the strategy's implementation. The now refined list is riverflies, Lepidoptera, so that's butterflies and moths, herpetofauna, which are amphibians and reptiles, rare arable flora, bats, white and violet helleborine, which are orchids, swifts, barn owl, water voles, dormice, hedgehog, and moving on to the wider landscape features, the River Test, including the Winterbournes, River Loddon, River Enbourne, our Basingstoke Canal, the North Wessex Downs National Landscape now. It is referred to as a national landscape since we last met rather than the area of outstanding natural beauty. That designation has changed. Our northern heathlands, our meadows and neutral grassland, our wooded features, so woodland, wood pasture, trees and scrub, our hedgerows, which are our nature highways, as it were, our accessible natural green space, protected sites, and verges and open space. So as promised, we wanted to bring to you a few maps just to kind of highlight some of our process that goes beyond some of the detail that's been provided in the report submitted to you. And to try and help visualise for the public that will be reading these documents, and to help outline how we'll use this information to progress our own priorities. So this is a map of hedgerows in the borough, which as an ecologist I find quite exciting because it shows the wonderful network of hedgerows across the borough. You can it's so evident how important they are for connecting nature across the borough. Okay, and as you can see, we've got certain areas, obviously are the big urban areas, but also certain more significant arable areas where the hedgerows are much more limited in their extent. So, you know, that to us is a very clear indication of that's where we need to be focusing efforts in terms of reconnecting our landscapes with hedgerows. So this is in part to demonstrate our response to feedback that you provided at the last meeting, but also to highlight this is one of our priority areas. So this is the river Enbourne, and it's not just the river itself. It's the associated habitats, the water meadows. It's the other wetlands associated with it. And the key here is this will be fed into the local nature recovery strategies. And the idea being is these are key areas for investment in nature. So this is where we want to guide investment using BNG or other mechanisms. And a third map, which is our herpetofauna map. So you'll see what we've done is actually we've created heat mapping, it's called. So rather than having a speckled map full of dots showing where records are for different reptiles and amphibians, our GIS genius Scott has created heat mapping to show where the real concentrations of those species are. And you can see they have a very distinct concentration across the northern area. So that's our northern heathlands band, but especially just north of Basingstoke, where you'll also see we have our Great Crested Newt priority areas. Now those are derived from our partnership mapping done with NatureSpace around our district level licensing approach. So they've helped us identify key areas for investment in pond creation as a result of mitigation associated with Great Crested Newts, and also some of our designated sites, so our local designated sites which are specifically designated for Great Crested Newt. So you can see it's a real tool to help us guide our thinking in terms of planning responses and also investment for those taxa. So some of the actions. Obviously, it's really all about the actions. It's what we want to deliver. It's worth noting that the action plan is a separate document, and you'll have seen that from the submission in the report. It's going to evolve annually and feed the council work programme. It's going to be monitored and supported on a quarterly basis by the Biodiversity Strategy Delivery Group, which we'll be creating. And reports will be submitted annually to yourselves, to CEP, which will provide the committee an opportunity to review the progress and also adapt actions. So we want that to be a live document. We'll also be reporting, as per our new enhanced biodiversity duty, on a 5-yearly cycle to government. So we've got some headline actions that we wanted to bring focus to. The creation of a nature partnership for the borough to help jointly take action for the restoration of biodiversity. Delivering nature plans for our strategic allocations, strategic gaps and surrounds. Embedding BNG and maximising its potential, including supporting the enhancement and creation of habitats in the borough to supply units for developers. To develop an internal and external engagement plan to help us target and empower staff, volunteers and residents. Explore opportunities across our estate to undertake enhancements for nature and people. Continue to work closely with Natural Basingstoke and our other community partners in the management of the estate and for other opportunities. Develop garden advice and community champions in partnership with the Wildlife Trust. Develop summary sheets for our priorities listed above. Each of these will have detailed roadmaps behind them, developed with our key partners. This will be fed into the annual action plan for strategy delivery and prepare a monitoring plan to assess our progress and to inform our efforts. So we want to obviously give the opportunity for you to ask questions, but just to highlight before we do so that we'll be taking a full report to Cabinet for the 5th of March and publication toward the end of March of the strategy.
Thank you very much, Rob and Sue. So, going to put it to the committee. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask officers at all? So we've got Councillor Isaac and Councillor Carr. If I start with you, Councillor Isaac.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the officers for the report. It's obviously very disappointing that the portfolio holder's not here, but that can't be helped, obviously. I think it would be helpful just to understand, firstly, because the portfolio holder refers to the impact of loss of biodiversity at an alarming rate. Could we have some idea of, in a Basingstoke Borough Council perspective, what is actually happening in terms of loss of biodiversity?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so we're actually having commissioned at the moment a biodiversity audit of the borough to give us a very detailed picture of just that. So we understand what biodiversity is being lost internationally, nationally, but actually we have less of an idea locally, and we need to know more. Yeah, that should be published by the end of this financial year. So it will be we're aiming for end of March.
Which is quite extraordinary, really, because we're doing all sorts of things, all sorts of activities planned, spending all sorts of money, but we don't actually know what the problem is in the borough. So it's sort of about. It seems to me as though we're sort of putting the cart before the horse.
Oh, sorry. Just to be clear, it's the specificity provided by the biodiversity audit is about the borough, particularly in comparison to the national averages, for instance. But we certainly do know what the problem is. Yeah. So land use change is a huge factor in terms of the biodiversity loss globally and nationally as well. And that is a result predominantly of development and also conventional agriculture. So intensification of agriculture has played a massive part in biodiversity loss. We are a predominantly rural area and have significant areas within that of arable agriculture, which unfortunately lends more towards that impact than many other practices.
Okay, so we've had working groups set up, workshops, and we've met groups that are very motivated and interested in biodiversity. We've got partners such as Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, National Trust, North Wessex Downs National Landscape Test and Itchen and Loddon Catchment Partnerships, Natural England, Environment Agency, Forestry England, Natural Basingstoke and Greener Basingstoke. But what you've referred to is that a lot of the problem is about changes and intensification in agriculture. So have we spoken to farmers? Clearly, in terms of impact on the environment, house building is one where there's a major impact. Have we talked to house builders so we can work with them and understand the challenges that they face, so that we can make sure that our policies are going to be correctly directed in future?
In terms of agriculture, firstly, we haven't talked to farmers as yet on this. That's twofold, really. One is where we have influence. So we have limited influence over what farmers do in the borough. And secondly, where we do have influence, that is emerging at the moment. So with biodiversity net gain, that provides an opportunity for us to engage with farmers and help support investment in land use change. So that would be via set aside, renaturing of some of their land. One of the actions is several of the actions are related to that. But a key one is we're going to be hosting a rural forum, or we're proposing to host a rural forum, whereby we do start to actively engage with farmers on that front. And secondly, yes, we've been working closely with our planning colleagues, our regeneration colleagues, and have been having meetings with some of those external parties as well. We are directly supporting those colleagues, those officers, in making sure that local plan update, for instance, and regeneration schemes are impactful with biodiversity. So we're not claiming to have directly engaged with developers. We're working with officers who have. Yeah.
Thank you. So work to be done.
Oh yes, definitely. This is a start. It's setting our vision. There is a lot of work still to be done. Yeah. No. Absolutely.
So I'll, if I may, Chair, one more question, and I've got more to come. But
Can I mean, you've had a little bit of time there. Can I just let Councillor Carr jump in, unless they are related to the
no,
what you were talking
that's
about?
fine. Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, first of all, for recognising the importance of the River Enbourne and the landscape and the biodiversity there and the work that needs to be done with West Berkshire. I'm pleased to see the involvement now with the River Kennet group. Equally, I think it is pleasing to see that there will be explicit reference to the Bourne rivulets. That is something that I'm delighted to see. And I know that my parishioners in St Marybourne and Hurstbourne Priors will be as well. Can I make an appeal when it comes to those conversations you'll have about specific geographies, that we make sure we're talking to specific groups within those geographies, so that when the next work is progressed on the Test and the Winterbournes, on the Bourne rivulets, on the River Enbourne, my appeal would be that there is a direct conversation that then takes place with the relevant community groups and parish councils. So, for example, when we're talking about the Bourne rivulet, it would be important for officers to start talking to Sustainable Bourne Valley, to the two parish councils there, for example. I think my next point relates to process. There has been discussion about summary sheets, and there's been discussion about an action plan. I'm pleased to hear a commitment that we'll take away and recall, that the action plans will be brought to this committee annually to review. I think when we're talking about specific summary sheets for specific geographies, I think it's really important that ward members are brought into that conversation as well. I think it would be gravely disappointing if those summary sheets for geographies within wards were progressed without the active participation of ward members. I'll let that sit for the moment. Just one final point. There is a correction that needs to be made. Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. It's a little disappointing that that's not accurate.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Can I just, before any feedback from the officers there, just a reminder, this is questions to officers, and if we can save comment for afterwards, it just allows the questions to get through that way. Do you have any comments?
No, acknowledged. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Councillor Golding next.
Lovely, thank you. I quite like a good map, so I enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. The heat map was particularly interesting because it's the first sort of time I'd seen anything like that for the borough. One thing I'm sort of cautious on is, of course, where you've got more data, you seem to have more evidence of protected species, which makes lots of sense. But obviously what I don't want us to therefore assume is where there's absence of data, there is absence of protected species. What I couldn't really see in the plan was anything to try and gather more data and try and flesh that out across the borough more widely.
No, thanks. And sorry. I'm glad you enjoyed the maps. I love them as well. They're fantastic. Sorry. There certainly is. We will be. One of the next big steps is developing the monitoring plan, and the monitoring plan is there to do just that. It's to increase our understanding. It's to monitor our progress against the specific actions. It's to inform our estate management. and actually to try and engage with communities as well, to try and utilise citizen science as well. So absolutely, we will be constantly striving to gather more information. And no, you're 100% right. Absence of data does not mean absence of species. Yeah. Thank you.
So is there a way of, I don't know, like, are you thinking kind of a community nature watch and having, pictures of protected species up so that people can let you know when they spot a particular orchid and things like that?
Things like that, yeah. We haven't fled that. I mean, we don't have the detail with that yet. But certainly, what we're hoping to do is to work closely with the community conservation groups, some of the groups that Councillor Carr's described. Certainly, we have really good relationships via Natural Basingstoke with quite a few of those, and we're hoping to do taxa or species specific surveys. It might be that we don't organise those. It might be that we gather data from those surveys, these community surveys that already happen. There's no point in duplication. So some of those will be more specific around sites that we manage, and some of them will be targeted towards us developing our understanding of particular species and taxa, habitats, and the landscape scale effects for biodiversity across the borough.
Thank you very much. Next up on the list then was Councillor Vaux.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Rob. Always very expert detail in your reports, which is always very impressive. Coming back to the lovely heat map, there seemed to be a very strong area. So I think you referred to it as just north of Basingstoke, and without wanting to sort of do the this is a lovely beach, don't everybody go on holiday, and then everybody goes on holiday there, so not wanting to suddenly swamp an area, I couldn't actually figure out where it was. It seemed jolly close to the Ministry of Defence training camp, which slightly concerned me, because I doubt lots of rare species are happy with all the gunfire going on around there.
So good eye. It is effectively in that area, yeah. And actually, interestingly enough, some of our most nature-rich sites in the UK are those that are managed by the MOD, yeah, actually, because they are relatively undisturbed, and the MOD isn't in a habit of applying lots of agrochemicals. So actually, they can be some of the most species-rich areas. You look at Salisbury Plain; it's incredible, But yeah, so we are aware of that area, hence the designation that sits on it as well, and it is subject to quite a bit of development pressure as well. So it's a really sensitive area.
Sorry, what designation?
Sorry, it's got a site of importance for nature conservation designation. If you can see the little pink blob in the heart of the large green blob with the cross hatching, that's a designation. So that is a protected area at the heart of that priority area. Yeah. So we are aware of it. We need to do more, as with all of this.
So sorry, Chair. Is that little pink blob then right in the middle of the MOD bit, or is it outside of the MOD bit?
Yeah, I don't actually know specifically whether it's inside or outside, to be honest.
Thank you, Councillor Vaux. Just a brief interruption. Yes, military sites, from my past experience, are quite heavily protected in a lot of areas. And just a little bit of, before going out on exercise, we always used to get Tony Robinson video on preserving nature on Salisbury Plain. It's one for the eye. Anyway, back over to Councillor Isaac before we come to Councillor Simon.
Thank you, Chair. The report quite correctly states that one of our focuses should be on stuff that we control us directly, and we are major landowners as a borough, and we're going to have an annual delivery plan, which is good to hear. Could you give me some idea of, in 12 months' time, what you would expect us to notice in terms of changes to our estate, our land holdings? You know, what would our residents say? Oh, that's different. That's moved on.
Oh, that's good. It's a really good question. Can I reframe it to say what I hope? Yeah, because there are always going to be barriers. So the first step is we are going to be undertaking a review of our green estate. So that includes all of our open space, all of our verges, all of the verges that we manage, everything that we undertake management for effectively, and we'll be working very closely with our grounds maintenance team, our property services, and all of the relevant internal stakeholders. But also, what I would like to do is actually undertake some external consultation on that. So ask the public to specifically identify areas that they think are the best for enhancements. Okay, so and that will be working with groups as well. Again, that's going back to Councillor Carr's point about working with the local groups. So hopefully that will result in us identifying a suite of sites that firstly we can enhance for, do major enhancements for using biodiversity net gain. So that might be some of our, hopefully, ideally, that would be some of our larger sites that aren't too far from urban areas, so people can still connect with those sites as well. They can access them. That's the really ultimate ideal, and they'll be able to see wetland creation. They'll be able to see floristic enhancements to the sward. It might be woodland creation, or it might be adapting some woodland management. We own quite a lot of woodland that is currently not necessarily managed in the most effective way. So it would be firstly that large thing around biodiversity net gain, taking a few sites and really doing some substantial work to them. That would be capital works as well. Sometimes large capital works can be a bit ugly to start with, so possibly within 12 months people will be complaining because we've created a lot of bare ground, possibly, but actually hopefully a year on they'll be saying, oh, why were we complaining? This is wonderful. Hopefully. Secondly, we'll be identifying where across the verges and our amenity open space, where's suitable for more basic enhancements. So that might be some wildflower enhancements, it might be bulb planting, or it might be the establishment of scrub pockets, rotationally managed scrub pockets. And then lastly, what we're hoping to do is the sites that we already manage effectively for biodiversity, and that will be Leanne's Green Team, the Ranger Services team. What we're hoping to do is to apply for countryside stewardship, which is in part funding and in part guidance to help us manage those sites more effectively. So hopefully the public will see us taking action on a larger scale on certain sites, and then in smaller pockets across our verges and open space, hopefully that, you know, these things can take longer getting through the processes. The establishment process can take longer. I'm hoping we can expedite them as quickly as possible. But to me, that green estate piece is up there, number 1 or 2, you know, as our priorities. Like that, we really need to get that moving forward.
Just one other question.
Can I just add to that? Because I agree with Rob, it's a great question and it's in the back of our minds all the time. But there are changes already happening on the ground, which are fantastic, and they are being driven a lot by the Ranger team. We've got a very tiny little plant you probably haven't heard of called a petty whin that is already out and about and much more in evidence than it was before. So people will start to see cowslips where they didn't see them before. They'll start to see orchids. They might not be able to name them. It doesn't matter. They will begin to see those results, and they're already happening. And on those natural green spaces, we need to distinguish between the two areas. So we've got these natural green spaces, which we have management plans for, and we've been operating those for a couple of years now, and we're beginning to see real changes happening. Then we've got the more formally managed open spaces like the verges and some of our parks that we need to do some more improvement works on, without a doubt. That's something to take forward. We're aware that communication is one of the things that we haven't been as strong on, communicating these good messages to the public and the residents. And we have just secured a new position. This person started a couple of weeks ago, who's an engagement officer based within the Ranger team, and their role is to liaise and work with residents more. So hopefully those messages will be getting out. But yeah, thank you for the question.
My pleasure. Yes, and next question I have is about biodiversity net gain and the statutory responsibility that's now on us in terms of house building. And there's going to be a lot of house building. There's going to be there's continued loss of much valued green spaces. And so this is an important role that we have. I suppose my question is I think there's certainly it's mentioned in the draft local plan, the reference to a requirement that 10% biodiversity net gain will be maintained for 30 years. Who is going to be responsible for maintaining that biodiversity net gain for 30 years? Because the builders would have cleared off a long time.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Another really good question, actually, and one that we're hoping to come back at an appropriate time we have a separate paper about BNG specifically, but nonetheless, yeah. So the 30-year period, that's part of the challenge. It's one of the big challenges with biodiversity net gain, and the way it's secured is through Section 106. So that Section 106 will have to be signed not just with the builder, it will have to be signed with either the management company. One of the ideals possibly is where that net gain happens on site as part of a development. It might be that we take that on and then we get commuted sums to manage that site. One of the outcomes of this is, as I was kind of inferring earlier, about farmers and landowners developing habitat banks. So they would be habitat banks that developers would purchase units from, and then the management of those banks is then the responsibility of the landowner for a prolonged period. One of the things that we're trying to push towards is make sure that where those habitat banks are created, they're created in borough and within our priority areas. So that's kind of hopefully, yeah.
To my way of thinking, it sounds like a can of worms, because 30 years is a hell of a long time, and I can foresee developers having disappeared, so they can't be pursued, and then requirements on through service charges, dare I say, on householders to maintain this. But I leave it because it looks to me as though you are very aware of the problem.
Aware of it, have answers to it. Yeah, here's a difference. You might see some sweat come out my brow. BNG is, to be honest, a bit of a headache, and we're still working through the details. It's been a very slow, iterative rollout from government. The details are still emerging now. It was meant to have launched in November. It was then meant to have launched in January. We still haven't had the secondary legislation. It's now officially marked for the 12th of Feb launch. But we still haven't seen actually all of the approved secondary legislation. So it feels like it has been and still is a bit of a movable feast. And some things in that guidance have come out that were slightly more unexpected. We were hoping for more assurances, maybe less have actually been provided. So some of the answers to that question and a whole host of how we're going to be dealing with B&G. We have ideas about how we're going to be dealing with them, and we're hoping to bring that to decision makers in pretty short amount of time.
Thank you very much. On to Councillor Slimin.
Thank you, Chair. Very much welcome the paper, and thank you very much for your presentation, Rob. I was going to ask a similar question that Councillor Isaac started with, and I meant all the way through looking at the paper, I never saw the word KPI anywhere. Now, I know that's a bad word in some senses, But, for example, on page 39, MR2, Natural Capital, who we've had conversations about that, is do we know where we are and do we know where we'd like to be so that we know whether we've met that objective? That's just one example of things. And presumably that would go with all the other reports that then go to scrutiny, not necessarily to this committee. So again, it's how we judge, as the members are highlighting, how do we know that we've improved? My other question was about schools. I noticed that you're going to start working with schools. We used to do quite a lot of work with schools in the past, so I'm very pleased to see that. Are we thinking of employing somebody directly to deal with the engagement side of schools, or is this new engagement officer going to do that? Because it's my thought that schools could be people go out and look at sites and do a little bit of survey work themselves, obviously depending on the age of the young people. The senior levels could go out and do what I used to do, go out and measure and find plants and animals and do all of that thing. So it would be a real benefit, I think, to schools to be able to use that as a place of going out and looking at sites near to their school, or not necessarily so close, sometimes a bit further away. I'm sure that in Tadley, going out on our Triple SI, which is Tadley Common, which is full of adders and lots of other nice things. Obviously, we need to be a bit aware of that at some times of the year because they might get bitten. But those are the sorts of things I think that we could do. So I very much welcome what you're doing. I think the other question I had, or the red flag that came up for me, was mention of the countryside stewardess. I can't say it today. Stewardess scheme. Tadley Town Council, as Cherbury trustees for the Common, have an agreement with them because we put cattle on there to be able to keep the gorse down. And every year we have the same issue that we never know whether we're going to get any money. And then sometimes we get a bit more and sometimes we don't get any and sometimes we have to wait forever to get it. So I'm just be a bit wary about how much reliance you can have on that. It might be something that comes out in the new Environment Act information, and I'm aware everything gets delayed and it's in the fine detail. But certainly I think there's a lot to be had. And because we were talking about MOD sites, I know AWE is literally on the other side of the line, but that is full of interesting species that don't get much interruption from the members of the public, especially in one area that there's lots of things that go off bang. And they have got lots of surveys and lots of survey work, and those animals are literally, and plants and species are literally on the other side. Talking to the AWE people, they've got lots of information about what's on there. They do an awful lot of environment work, so again, that might be somewhere that you would explore. I think that's start. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Let's start with the last one first, AWE. Yeah, that's really interesting. One of our priority areas will be that Northern Heathlands, and we hope to use that area to start engaging with potential partners like AWE. So we'll take that on board, actually, a really interesting point. Countryside stewardship, yeah, inconsistent. RPA are, been proven to be a bit of a nightmare. And yeah, very aware of that and treating it with caution appropriately, yeah. Schools, so the Nature Engagement Officer is there to predominantly work with schools and develop a plan, possibly including some of the things that you just described. It would be nice to see that schools get out to some of our sites, or just sites in the vicinity. Absolutely, yeah. And then, the KPIs. I guess two things. One is where we'll be coming back to you with our reporting. It'll be twofold. One will be, have we achieved what we've set out to achieve in terms of our process and our outputs, and then how do you measure the outcomes? How do you actually measure what is happening on the ground? So where we're having our biodiversity audit, that will give us a really good picture of the state of nature in the borough. And with our to be developed monitoring plan, we will be, as I mentioned, attempting to gather as much data to ensure that we are effectively assessing biodiversity. Now, we'll need to be reviewing that, as we said, on an annual basis. We'll also be reviewing on a quarterly basis with our delivery group. And if we're finding that that is not effective, we will have to adapt. And going back to one of our principles, adaptability is our watchword. You know, we think we've got some clear answers, and we think we know how we can monitor the effects of our actions and joint actions. But it might be that somewhere along the line that data isn't available, or a surveyor isn't able to deliver some of the surveys, and all of this kind of thing. I would note one good thing, we've got a nature engagement officer. Actually, in a couple of weeks, we've got an assistant biodiversity officer starting as well. And their role will be twofold. It's actually supporting the delivery of BNG, and it will be monitoring. So we've recruited a fantastic young ecologist, and with really, really great experience in terms of ecological monitoring. So we're going to really try and utilise that as much as possible. So, our resource is growing in biodiversity, and hopefully will help us solve some of those problems. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just respond to a couple of things as well? I think the other thing to be aware of is that we aren't the only influence on biodiversity, so we might do everything right, we might do really well in what we're trying to deliver and deliver our actions, and then something else might happen that's outside of our control, and we have to be very mindful of that. And that's why when we look at the monitoring and assessing how effective we are, we need to make sure that is looking at what we are delivering, as well as hopefully those results on the ground, but we need to be mindful. We do have KPIs currently going forward around some of this area of work, particularly around the management of the natural green space, which is good. But we want to definitely monitor the work of this strategy and the team through a monitoring programme specifically developed for this, and that will do that. There's also the Hampshire Biodiversity Information Centre, so all the data that we have that is approved, it goes into this Hampshire Biodiversity Information Centre. They're our record centre for the whole of Hampshire, and that's really good because they actually make sure that the data that we're providing is accurate and correct. And the thing about surveys, there's two reasons why you do it. One is to find out data. The other is to get people involved. And the schools are great for getting them involved, but the information they pull out may not be necessarily as robust as we'd like, but there are other things that we can do, like something called BioBlitz, other ways that you can get more robust data. So there's lots of options. It's just making sure that we prioritise, that we focus our resources, and we target our work so we're making the most effect we can with the resources and the time and the finances that we have.
But before you jump in, Joe, is it a question related to what was just said, or is it more of a comment?
No, it's another question.
A question, okay.
I wanted to ask about the designation of local nature reserves and how that work is going to happen, and who are you going to, presumably, are you going to involve the ward councillors in those conversations, and who else would you be contacting to see how that would actually take place? I mean, presumably these are new areas that people will bring forward as suggestions. Presumably you're talking to stakeholders who might have some ideas already about where those areas need particularly to be done. But in conjunction with the local plan, obviously we need to be doing this work now before more sites come forward as speculative development, for example, to make sure that we've actually already done the work as soon as possible.
Yes, thank you. Yes, they have a really important role to play, local nature reserves, and there are, as you know, some that have been designated. We do have a list that we've been working to, but that list, our plan this year is to review that list to make sure that the prioritisation is correct, and in that process, yes, we will be talking to ward members and others.
Thank you. Councillor Phillimore?
Thanks, Chair. A comment, then a question. It's not all bad news. Thanks for your presentation. It's not all bad news. Otters have come right up the test to the source at Ash. We have long-eared owls in Overton this week in Basingstoke. Waxwings have been spotted It's not all bad news. Who doesn't like to see a red kite? It's not all bad news. Outside bodies are working, doing the stewardship okay. In the Evangar ward, Lord Carnarvon is working on a project to reintroduce juniper. So it's not all bad news. My question to you, Rob, is a bit more on development and planning. And if something is termed to be a protected species, how are we going to protect them when it comes to planning applications? Because ecological surveys seem to be a box ticking exercise for me. And then we get told that slow worms can have a specific corridor, or dormice can have a specific corridor. It's complete rubbish. But how can we strengthen that when those planning applications come through?
So, yeah, protected species are an interesting challenge specifically. So, some of those that you described, so dormice, etc., they require a license. So that license is provided by Natural England, and that licensing process is separate to but adjoined to the planning application. So where an approach has been approved by Natural England for the licensing of a particular protected species, we don't necessarily have the wherewithal. We aren't necessarily able to decline that approved plan, despite the fact that we might not think it is the best practice. However, we feel in the updated local plan that we've increased protection. We feel that it actually does contain some good ambition to help us undertake that protection required. We have two very good biodiversity officers now in post. One very, very experienced, Chris Slack, and our newest recruit, most recent recruit, Becky Aziz. So with them both in post and with our soon to be Phil Post, the assistant, it should also give us the time. So one of the big challenges is we have a huge amount of casework, a lot of majors that take a lot of time for each of the officers to really process and to get the best out of each of those. So with that increasing resource, we're also hoping, we believe, that we can be more deliberate, we can take more time and be better at that casework as it goes. Yeah.
And I just wanted to come in on the other bit about the it's not all bad news. You're absolutely right. And I remember when I started off in this industry, otters were declining and disappearing from our rivers, and they're now back in every single river in England, which is brilliant. And that's the tone that we're going to be using for our strategy. It will be upbeat, it will be optimistic, it'll be about what we want to do, what we can achieve. So thank you for that reminder.
Thank you very much. So I've got three more. So Councillor Connor, then Golding and Compton Burnett. Is there any other questions at the moment, though? No? Councillor Connor.
Thanks, Chair. It's sort of an observation and a question. I'll pull us back a little bit down the upstream to the conversation. Was I questioned this about the notion that Basingstoke Council is the largest landowner. Just doesn't sit right at all, given I live in the southeast of the county. My neighbours are the Sainsbury's, the Heinekens and the Moundsmere and the Farleys. But that aside, I like the idea of the habitat banks, but my problem is, where I live, is that we've just been washed out. So how are we going to encourage those big landowners to... I know they're not responsible for the roads because that's Hampshire County Council, but that they are responsible for the verges and the hedgerows and all the rest of it. But if they're not keeping up, if they're not kept up to standards, then every time we get a heavy rainfall, we're flooded out, and all our frogs and toads and newts are washed out. So how are we going to address that?
Yeah, no, that's a big question. But part of the emphasis that the strategy tries to make is on what's called the ecosystem services that nature provides. So flood risk reduction is explicitly one of those. So where we help direct green investment, so that could be through biodiversity net gain, habitat banks as you described, we want that to not just provide services to biodiversity, we want it to provide for the community as well. And that is hopefully brought through in the emphasis on our priority areas being around our three key catchments, and specifically very close to those catchments, because we want to make sure that, because they are good places to invest to help support flood risk reduction. Biodiversity net gain is not the only pot of money coming forward. There are various others, including those more directly associated with nature-based solutions and flooding. And so where we're stating that we want to encourage green investment, that would very much be part of it. So it's about facilitating that investment. It's about supporting that coming into the into the borough, and by creating a partnership for nature, what we're doing is we want to create an empowered, useful partnership that is there to deliver with us, for us, that is there to help action to be taken. So, having said that, we've acknowledged that the council has only limited influence, but if we're working in partnership, in a formal partnership with other bodies, with other groups, with farmers, landowners, CLA, NFU, then that increases the influence of that partnership, and hopefully that to my mind is going to be one of the key vehicles to help guide investment, to help influence change on land that isn't necessarily our own or where we have indirect influence. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Golding.
Thank you. So I'm looking at your action plan. I have to admit, seeing ongoing on an action plan makes me really twitchy. I come from education and health, and we have SMART targets where ongoing isn't acceptable. So some things I think probably aren't actually ongoing. Like developing a delivery group is a finite state. Either you've got one or you haven't. It probably could be a short-term one rather than an ongoing one. But there are other things where I appreciate the spirit is that actually you want to keep doing things and not do it once and then stop. But for something like local nature reserves being declared or guides being published, it almost feels like having a target of like, well, we're going to aim to do 2 a year would be really helpful to kind of give us reassurance that you are on it and you are prioritising it, but also so that, you know, we can look at it in a year's time and go, yeah, well, actually, you know, this is what you thought was reasonable and this is what you've achieved. Overachieving is always fine. And just for speed, I was going to raise it in debate, but please could you reorganise your list of priorities and just group things, like group all the flowers together, group all the animals together, group all the landscapes together, because for someone who doesn't necessarily recognise the technical names, it's actually really confusing and would be much easier if it was reformatted a bit.
So that, yeah, really good point, the last point, thank you, that's really useful actually. And we'll look at the delivery group wording, and absolutely, yeah, we can, I think we this is, you know, we're still not there, we're still not 100% there, we totally admit that. And yeah, we can very much have conversations about those deliverables, yeah, 100%, yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Councillor Compton, but I'm just going to jump in before because it's a question related to those priorities. Was that just a list of priorities, or was the order that you read them out the priority? One thing that I hate is a list of so-called priorities that aren't prioritised, one to whatever. And the reason why I say this, and it was interesting that you brought up the map of where the newts are just after the map about the River Emborn. Now, both of those are a priority, but what happens if some work needs to be done on the River Emborn that's going to affect some of the newts? How do you prioritise that? I think for me it would be good to see a prioritised list rather than just a list of so-called priorities, if that's possible.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And yeah, I think related to Councillor Holding's point, actually grouping those and possibly ranking them. I guess to help that, there is a distinction in some of those priorities because some of them are explicitly there to help guide green investment. So it will be fed into the local nature recovery strategy, and will hopefully therefore guide that BNG investment. However, some of them are there to help guide us and to help guide monitoring and things. So I think we do need to make a distinction there, and we can do that.
Can I? Sorry. And also just say around the priorities, we've identified those because they could be one of sort of 4 different values that they bring. So it could be it's what we call a flagship species, something that people can relate to. So things like a dormouse, a hedgehog, they may see that, certainly the hedgehog, out and about, and it's important that we have species that people can get affiliation with rather than something like a helleborine that you haven't got a clue what it looks like. Others are indicator species, so they are things that are telling us what's going on in the wider habitat, and that's why they've been picked. So those priorities are there for lots of different reasons, and whenever you come across an issue around conflict between different habitats, different species, that's what these guys are paid to look at, is to go and get the best and benefit for all that's important, so they would be doing that.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, because I mean, in the world that I work in, if everything's a priority, nothing is. And then finally, Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. To be honest, you answered the question I was going to ask, which was about farmers, when you responded to Councillor Connor. But I would just like to say thank you so much for this. It's absolutely brilliant, and your enthusiasm is contagious. So very best wishes with all of this work. It's really exciting. Thank you.
It's very kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we move on to any comments, debate, I do have a question around the definition of a hedgerow, because I noticed on the map that there was quite a distinct lack of so-called hedgerow in the urban sort of Basingstoke. Yet when I drive through, there are plenty of hedges. What's the difference between an official hedgerow and what I'm looking at?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's been a lot of those tonight. One of the things that we're blessed with is biodiversity data. Biodiversity data is flawed. It fundamentally is flawed. We can make as many assumptions as possible based on it. But going back to Councillor Holding's point very early on about absence of a record does not mean absence. Is actually a really important, was one of the fundamental things that all ecologists are taught. So, and in this case, absence of a hedgerow on that map does not mean absence of a hedgerow. So we have limited data sets. That data set is a particular one that's derived from our Biodiversity Information Centre. It includes hedgerows from in a certain parameters. It doesn't include hedgerows that are within our own green space. However, a hedgerow is a 2 to 5 metre. Sorry, no. Yeah. So we and actually part of the import of hedgerows is one of their key value is in their connectivity. So the connectivity they offer. So where you have a hedgerow that's isolated, it can offer to nesting birds, for instance, but one of its fundamental functions in the landscape is missing. So it is, as with a lot of these things, indicative. It doesn't mean that something is not there. Yeah.
I would say even the hedgerow regulations don't define what a hedge is. So you could debate that one for quite some time.
I'll leave that for some bedtime reading, I think. Thank you very much. So I'm going to open it up then to comment and debate. If there's anybody that would like to make some comment. Councillor Isaac.
Thanks, Chair. I congratulate the officers on the report. It's clearly a very, very ambitious objective, and but necessary. So it has my support. But I suppose that I'm keen that that there's an understanding that when it's not a zero-sum game, and choices have to be made, and there will be conflicts with other council policies, for instance, in terms of development of greenfield sites, and we need to make sure that in the interaction between what your team is doing and what the planning department wants to get done and what developers want to get done, that we work as harmoniously and efficiently as possible. I give examples where I've got residents who got planning permission to build a house, but there was a huge delay into years because of the need to not deal with the issue of great crested newts, but actually establishing whether great crested newts were present in a pond, and so those are the sort of things that drive certain residents completely around the twist. And so, if there's an awareness of that would be good. The other thing about the report I'll just mention is that, just coming back to the point about the extent to which we are significant landowners as a council, and therefore that's within our control. I think I would have expected to see some reference to Manydown here, where we've got 2,000 acres, and where we are joint owners with Hampshire County Council, and therefore there is a great opportunity there. We're going to have a countryside park, so I would have expected some reference in the report to what our ambitions are in relation to that, because we can be an exemplar there, and so it's a very fertile opportunity for us as an organisation. And the other thing I think that's missing is any reference to Saunders Field. When we were in administration, we were clear that there was an opportunity there for wildlife, public access, and that doesn't seem to be being progressed at all. And therefore, I would highlight that as something that you might like to look into.
I mean, I'm happy for you to respond. We've got a fair bit to go, but yeah. Okay, thank you. And Councillor Vo, you wanted to make comment as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, very interesting. I was going to say discussion. It wasn't meant to be discussion. It was meant to be questions, but nevertheless, quite provoking. Quite a lot of thought on it. And I think two takeaways for me. One is, as Councillor Fillmore said, I think there is something about the heat map, particularly, and some other comments in this report about the link with planning and biodiversity, and particularly seeing that heat map and where there seemed to be an awful lot of biodiversity that we would like to protect and nurture is exactly where we're about to put thousands of houses, is quite a worry. I mean, I know Cufford Lane, we tried. Well, I didn't. I admired the people who did. It was in COVID, so we were out doing our walks up and down Cufford Lane, and they were putting in a toad crossing. They closed the whole of Cufford Lane for quite some time to put an underground tunnel underneath Cufford Lane for the toads. I'm not at all convinced that it did the trick for the toads, but we do invest a lot of money in trying to support biodiversity. But what I'm hearing is, we need to be thinking more about the impact on developments on biodiversity where we know we've got it there. So, we should treasure it. It's not just the River Loddon, the River Test, the River Emborn or whatever. We need to also be thinking about, we've got particular places of biodiversity and we should treasure them and think very carefully about that. So one of my takeaways is, let's look at the local plan update, what's in there. let's make sure that we're overlaying this kind of work with that properly. My other takeaway is the engagement with our residents, because we can only achieve all of this if we have the resources of our residents. We can't do it by ourselves. It's massive, it's too big. And there are some great conservation groups, such as the Chinham Conservation Group, which I'm sure Councillor Howard Sorrell would talk about, but it would make him blush because his wife is very integral in doing it. Our ranger team have been really, really good in supporting some of our local conservation groups. And the work that they do is astonishing. I mean, I haven't been out with them as much as I would like, but when I do, my goodness, their knowledge about reptiles and fungi and all the other stuff that's going on. And they're working in copses and areas in what we now classify as urban Basingstoke. I don't particularly like thinking I'm living in urban when I thought I was living in rural, but I am now, because we've been swallowed up. But they are living in these pockets of green spaces and really showing how much diversity there is there. And I think that they're really pulling in local residents because they can see the difference it's making. So I commend the Rangers on that, and I think that is a good model for us to roll out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to say anything because there's quite a lot of optimism in the room, and I hate being a bit of a doomer about these sorts of things. But sadly, somebody made the point earlier that 30 years is quite a long time, and it is, because in 30 years' time, the global temperature will be over 2 degrees higher than it was pre-industrial revolution, and a lot of the things that we're implementing as part of this strategy will be completely ineffective when species are having mass die-offs due to the temperature, due to extreme weather events, and there's no way to account for that, but it's worth mentioning anyway, because it's better to do something than nothing, but at the same time there's no point to any of this, because you can't account for those extreme events that will render it all completely irrelevant. So there you go, there's a little bit of pessimism just to temper some of the optimism.
Thank you for bringing the tone of the meeting right down to Councillor Phillimore.
I think what I would note from tonight, and thanks very much for everything you've done, Rob, is it's going to be a lot easier to control our own estate than to engage with private landowners. And you know, my favourite bugbear at the moment, Rob, is, sorry to be parochial, but the lagoons alongside the River Test in Overton, which we've identified the River Test. I'm proud to have championed the Portal site as a brownfield site for development rather than greenfield site. But these lagoons are owned by a private company. I've handed you tonight 21 pages of species that have been encountered there. And how do we engage with these private companies or other bodies?
Thank you, Councillor Phillimore. I think it's something that certainly needs to be taken away and looked into. I am going to use Chair's discretion because I know that we've got Councillor tucked away at the back there. I know she's very keen on the environment. Is there anything that you'd like, any comment that you'd like to add this evening at all? I know it's just sprung this upon you, but... Thank you. Okay, so if we move back then to the agenda, if I can find it in front of me, we were asked to recommendation was to make comments on the draft biodiversity strategy as shown in Appendix 2 and the draft action plan. I think we've managed to make a fair few comments this evening. Hopefully we'll take that forward. I would ask though that once the audit has taken place, if that can be relayed to members, not just of the committee but across the council, and also there was note that the biodiversity net gain paper was going to come back at some point. If we can work together to bring that forward in some shape or form, that would be great. But thank you very much for coming this evening, and thanks very much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. So we'll just have a couple of minutes for a swap over onto the next item. Okay, I think we're all in place now. So we've got item 6 on the agenda. Then this is at the request of Councillor Vaux, just a scrutiny of some of the sports within the playing pitch strategy, and the sports were specifically identified by Councillor Vaux. So thank you very much for doing so. We've got Councillor Morrow, who will introduce the report, as well as Helen Taylor-Cobb, and we've also got Mike O'Mahony and Paul Martin will also do a presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Thank you, councillors. Right, so we're here tonight to discuss 3 sports in the playing pitch strategy: rugby, cricket and netball. The playing pitch strategy sets out how we as a council intend to meet our aspiration to maintain quality sport and leisure provision in the borough, and focuses on playing pitches and outdoor facilities. It helps us get the most out of our assets and facilities in Basingstoke and Deane, and shows us how they support formal and informal sport in the borough. It also identifies our future aspirations. At the request of CEP, officers have drafted a briefing paper examining the 3 sports in question, which gives us a good basis to have a positive discussion tonight. I'm going to hand over to my team now, and we can have a bit further information.
Evening, members. Thanks for the invitation to committee this evening. I thought rather than draft you all the way through the paper, which I know that you all have read, I thought I'd maybe just pull out a couple of the key points from the briefing paper, which I hope are of interest. So the current play pitch strategy is a 10-year strategy, and it was endorsed in 2015. Sport England advised that the evidence base is updated every 5 years, and we use that to underpin the decisions that the council makes around its sport provision. But there is an annual review programme that also takes place. We've outlined in the brief in section 3 and 4 some pretty important information in terms of the first part of this strategy in the area that we're looking at this evening. Towards the end of that, we obviously had quite a heavy impact to the sports and leisure area. They were really affected by the shutdown as a result of the COVID pandemic. And throughout that period of COVID, many of the NGB staff were furloughed. Officers and volunteers were very much focused on trying to sustain their clubs. And after that, they were subsequently very much focused on recovery through 2021. And I think it's perhaps worth drawing attention to the feedback from Sport England, who have actually predicted that it may take up to 10 years to recover the programmes to get things back to the pre-COVID period. Despite that, because I thought it would be nice to have some positive news, despite that, the impact of COVID on the clubs and the associations that we've been working with, the briefing note does outline and explain some of the achievements that have been achieved during this first phase during that period. So the committee asked us to consider some lessons learned from the progress to date, and also to think about the future challenges that we're likely to face. And I thought what I'd like to do is perhaps just call out a couple of the 2 key themes that are related to that. So across all 3 sports, it's really important that we focus on our relationships, not just with the national governing bodies, but also with our sports clubs and associations in the borough, because they are the people who help to inform our strategy and to attract inward investment into those facilities. And moving forward, that is also going to be one of the biggest challenges that we face, will be around securing that funding. I would like to highlight that within the strategies, a lot of what we put here in terms of our actions are aspirational. And I say that because we need to balance what we would like to achieve against the need to attract investment in order to achieve that. And to make sure that what we're putting in is sustainable for the future. There isn't any point us building something new and shiny if we can't maintain it. I've got 2 colleagues with me here this evening, so Mike and Paul, and they're going to be here to answer any of your detailed questions. So I will hand over to colleagues and back to Chair.
Thank you very much. Do you both have anything to present? It says you down as presenting, or I guess you're here to answer questions. That's fine. So if I'd like to open it up to questions, please, from the committee rather than points of statement. So I've got Councillor Vogt and then Councillor Phillimore.
Chair, I wondered if it would be easiest to just separate the three sports out initially, rather than having questions about randomly all three at once. Would it be okay to do?
Yep. Well, disappointingly, there isn't maybe as much attention on cricket, despite what happened before Christmas at full council. I know that you're very keen on rugby and netball, so I might let you start on those.
That's fine. We can do cricket.
Okay, let's start with cricket then. Anybody have any questions on cricket?
I'll start. Oh, no, you start.
Go on then, Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, cheers, Chair. I will go back to that committee meeting. And there was a strong representation to play informal cricket at the War Memorial Park. Now, if I was a official cricket team and had to book a council cricket pitch, I would be expected to pay for that privilege. And I just don't know where we differentiate informal sport to formal sport, because can I go to any football pitch and just take 22 people there at Stratton Park or Brighton Hill and just have a game of football? I'm just a bit confused that they were very strongly represented, but I mean the other clubs in which have got a league status have to pay the council for a pitch.
Yeah, probably the slightest difference, thank you, Councillor, between formal and informal is costs associated with it as well. So you provide sort of ancillary facilities, changing provision, upkeep of the pitch as well. If it's a cricket pitch, then it's exclusive use. There's a maintenance of the wicket, whereas the standard of formal and informal cricket is different. Obviously, the wicket types between the non-natural turf pitches, so the artificial turf is of a different standard to the upkeep of a normal grass wicket. So it's mainly the costs associated, where it is, and in terms of being able to book it out and the costs associated.
Thanks, Chair. Cricket is something I've also had to learn a lot about in the last few weeks after one of the two things going on. So looking at the strategy, so the strategy on page 12 talks about exploring opportunities for robust, low-maintenance public net facilities at War Memorial Park, Sherborne Road and Russell Howard Park. So in addition to that community strip that was brought to full council, I did ask the question, which is about people just rocking up and it's like putting your pullovers out and having a goalpost. So that's the kind of entry-level fun, just come and play a bit of cricket in the park. That's what it's about, and that's what the LRNA is saying we're short of. So I understood why people wanted to keep that strip in the War Memorial Park. But when I asked, with this paper coming to CEP, what else would be good to have at that entry level, I was told it was nets. And I do see community park nets as being something that's in here, is something that we should be thinking about providing. At least that's the way I read it. Maybe I've misunderstood it, looking at your face, Mike. Maybe I've misunderstood it. So my question back to the cricketers was, are there community park nets? Because I think when I've talked to officers about this before, the response was there's an issue with maintaining them, making sure they're used safely, that kind of thing. And I'm told that there are areas of the country where there are community nets where you just turn up and you can practice your cricket in nets. So my question is, I got the impression from the strategy that was something we were exploring. Is it something we're exploring or not?
Yeah, I can do. I guess it is subject to funding, but we have got a meeting next week with the ECB, and this is something they're picking up, very similar to Stratton Park with tennis in terms of the LTA and their park side of things. We do have to do some work in terms of the best location for that. Obviously, you say War Memorial, Stratton Park, and some of that will be detailed in with the formal cricket clubs as well. It's slightly harder to track the level of informal use than it is formal use. Obviously, for affiliated teams to the ECB, we have much more detail on who's using them, what, when, why, and therefore it's easier to feed in the need. But it is something that we'll definitely look at with the ECB next week for their kind of initiatives for park cricket as well.
I think it's fair to say national governing bodies are in a very different place now than where they were in 2014, 15, 16, where there's probably more emphasis on growth and what we can do to create more, stimulate more activity. What we've seen is a lot more girls playing cricket, probably in the back of all the television coverage. So you feel like there's been a subtle shift towards, well, let's try and pick up and consolidate that. So what we're finding is that in the emerging plan, because you notice it's not necessarily been replicated word for word in the ongoing update, is that there's a subtle shift towards trying to encourage more of that grassroots activity. But I still think there is scope for the informal stuff, so we will pick that up. But there's definitely subtle shifts in the way that national governing bodies are looking at developing the sport going forward.
Thank you. I know that there was some discussion yesterday when we spoke on the paper around an issue on some of the how we should do it, on some of the school stuff. It was raised by Councillor Compton-Burnett to myself, that you talk about investigating the viability of provision of non-turf pitches with community access at the Vine, Sheffield School and Tesbourne schools, but then there's nothing really in the report that says how you delivered or didn't deliver or what went wrong. Was it just deprioritised? Can you give a bit of an update onto that, please?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, in terms of it, it's all to do with both the Vine and Tesbourne have also had artificial grass wickets, artificial grass football pitches put in, which have taken up quite a large part of their playing pitch areas at the schools. So we've had to do some detailed work with that about pitch orientation, so they're able to rotate all of the sports pitches, and some of them haven't been as conducive for the artificial turf pitches because they are kind of they're put in and then you can't move them round, whereas actually you're able to rotate summer with having natural turf cricket pitches. So the schools have gone down that option a little bit more. Certainly in the Vine, when we installed the artificial grass pitch, we had to do some work with the ECB and the usage of May's Bounty. So the school were able to rotate and have the options there. And between all the national and governing bodies, it kind of felt that it was more beneficial to the school in terms of to have the artificial grass football pitch capable for rugby and other sports and still cater for the usage either smaller site on the Vine school itself and off-site if they needed to utilise May's Bounty.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. That was very helpful. I think that was a bit of a recurring theme, that there were some excellent actions that you put in the 2015 How Should We Do It, I think it was. And they weren't picked up in the report to say, we did it and it was amazing, or we didn't do it because, which would be really helpful learning. So I wonder whether it would be possible to do a sort of systematic review of all the actions that were there and just let us know how you got on, because it's important for us to understand, if there are barriers and challenges that you're facing that we can help you with. And the other thing I wondered was, I looked through the LRNA report, the executive summary that Mike very kindly sent to everybody, and I'm not sure that completely reflects the actions that you've got in some of the other documents. So it would be really good to sort of pull everything together where they should work together, things like the infrastructure development plan and the LRNA and your strategies, and just check that we don't miss anything, because you've obviously done so much work and it would be a real shame to drop the ball on anything. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Happily, yeah, very good feedback. Thank you. We'll have that to take away.
Thank you. And we'll note in the work programme the request that you've got. Any more questions then on cricket? Councillor Carr?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just a quick question for officers about cricket facilities in our rural areas and what kind of understanding you have of what facilities exist in rural areas. A case came up in my own patch some time ago where the borough had ended up allocating some funding for sports improvement relating to a development in Hurstbourne Priors. And that money then ended up being spent in Whitchurch. And when this was challenged, the argument that came back initially was that there wasn't an officer understanding of cricket facilities in Hurstbourne Priors. So it's just one example, but I think it speaks perhaps to a concern I would have that, you know, does the borough understand what our village communities, what our rural communities actually have? Because if they don't understand that, if there isn't that kind of grasp of what's there, then there's a risk of mistakes being made.
Yeah, I can answer that one. To be honest, I worked on that project with both. It's to do with the Section 106 and obviously the distance thresholds with pooling restrictions for that particular project. In Hurstbourne Priors, for example, it did have cricket there. It then stopped for 2 or 3 years whilst the club folded. And then obviously by the time that was collected on the Section 106, Hurstbourne Priors started again with a new cricket club. We've subsequently met with Hurstbourne Priors and allocated the funding they required, and we've also worked with them recently to just fund kind of some of the infrastructure on the pavilion. I know they need a new thatch roof as well, so there's funding being collected for that. So we have a pretty good idea of it. It is done through ECB, so obviously as soon as you drop out of a league, and that's what we were talking about in kind of formal and informal, but unfortunately that was delayed between when the planning came in and the permissions that were collected from that S106. At the time, Hurstbourne Priors didn't have a cricket club, so then obviously we had to work through that project. But yeah, we are quite aware with Hurstbourne Priors.
Thank you. Councillor Connor.
Just following on from Councillor Carr's commentary. Just to be sort of concise, why aren't we promoting the village teams, or why are we not promoting a village league in Basingstoke? This surely, if we promoted the village teams and the village cricket clubs, people would join them and use those facilities, and the need for, you know, random cricket pitches elsewhere in the borough would be reduced.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think that's certainly something we can take away in terms of, amplifying any communication around sports clubs. So I think that we do try to put in our good news stories in Basingstoke and Dean today to make sure that we try and share as much as we can about what we're doing. But I think we welcome your feedback, and that's certainly something we can look at.
Thank you very much. Any further comments then on cricket? Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. It's a general all-sport one. It comes back to something that you were just saying, and I'm so sorry I've forgotten your name. Paul, thank you. It was great to hear all of your knowledge about the school pitches, and I remember from the LRNA that was a recurring theme, that there would be so much benefit in having more access to school sports facilities. And I saw that there was a school partnership plan, but I couldn't find it on the website. Could you please just let me know? It sounds like you're working a lot with them already. What plans do we have for developing partnership with them so that we can get more access to their pitches and their building facilities? And I understand quite a lot's already happening with, say, BCOT and Everest. So what is your vision for that, please?
No problem. To be totally honest, it is a bit of a challenge that we've had for a long time. We can work with, and that's where it falls under the collaborative side of the strategy. In terms of lead, the only way that we can guarantee community use is through a community use agreement, and they are quite difficult to secure, particularly on existing facilities. So it really is kind of a collaborative approach, working with the schools, explaining and showing the benefit that it brings by having the community go to the facilities, and There's obviously an added income benefit to a certain extent for the facilities that are used, but securing it is a challenge. And the only way that we've been able to do it so far is through new provision. So things like the investment into the artificial grass pitches. We secure a community use agreement. There's also through certain funding avenues with things like the Football Foundation. They have a land charge put on the area for 21 years, so you know the investment's covered from that point. But it's kind of done by the goodwill as well of the school. It can be driven by the head teacher at the time as well. So to be honest, it is a challenge, but we just have to kind of keep communicating and working with the schools really.
I was just going to jump in, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, thank you. Is there any benefit in actually going in at Hampshire County Council level rather than school council, given particularly their current budgetary situation? Would they not see a tremendous benefit in getting lots of income from schools' facilities being used?
Yes, in some ways, and it depends on the facilities. So certainly things like the artificial grass pitches and sustainability, there is that. There's certain sports facilities, such as grass pitches, that probably require a subsidy, and that's where they're probably slightly less and more reluctant to kind of allow and open up usage. So it is working with them and educating them on kind of income versus cost. So I think it's that balance. We do try and work at HCC level, and we're trying to do it through certainly oncoming sites and Section 106s, working with the education authorities and Glenn Parkinson's team. But again, Hampshire County Council, again, I don't want to speak out of turn from their point of view. I think they tend to be a little bit more reliant on what the head teacher wants as well, and they're difficult to impose what they want onto the head teachers. So I think it's a bit challenging for them as well. So yeah, any opportunities that we can through Hampshire County Council would be welcome.
Mike, I'm going to just sort of add a point. I know we're excuse me, on cricket, but do you have the relationships with the schools? Because I know that there's a school in my ward that has started to use the fields for football, and they were approached directly by the football teams to use it rather than anybody from the council. I just think have you got that link with the head teachers, with the sports departments, to ask for that to happen and to highlight those opportunities for funding rather than it kind of coming the other way?
I think certainly for secondary schools, yes. Probably primary, we might need to be a little bit better at. Again, there is the kind of safeguarding issues and their sort of sides to it, and the feasibility of them getting them to the fields. So yeah, we work very closely with secondary education and where we can co-locate the facilities. But primary schools probably more, but I think it will come with some challenges as well.
I certainly think that that's something we can look into going forward. Councillor Morrow, you want to have some input on the cricket side?
Yeah, should have a say. So with the subject there, I mean, we do have a small team, so the way we're engaged with has to come that way. Otherwise, they couldn't do it the other way because there's so many people to engage with. So, and that is part of our job as councillors, to try and get our sports teams to engage with our department. So that's good. The main point I was going to say was about War Memorial Park. So the first question that came to Cabinet was very much about informal cricket. I did go out and have a look, and it was a dangerous strip, and I got straight on to looking into getting it repaired, and it fits in with the LRNA, with the fact that it's informal. Also, we've got national tennis now coming in. They're doing a lot at the pavilion, and so the plan is that we get a lot more sport happening in and around the pavilion. And so it seemed to fit to get a new cricket strip in there, and really with the mind to get lots of grassroots people playing cricket, the increase with women's cricket, so we're looking to get a real sporting buzz around there, also with the BMX track. So that's why I almost probably wish taken a little bit longer, but even the second question and the petition was all informal. We've spoken with the team that turned up on the night, and we're going to have conversations with them going forward, because obviously we've got a team that's really keen to play in a cricket league. So we're going to talk with them and try and find an answer for them, and that's ongoing. So I don't want to say anything at the moment, because it's one of those things where once we can actually find them a home and get them playing cricket, it would be brilliant for Basingstoke. So yeah, thanks, and thanks for all the questions tonight. It's really good. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what I'll do now is ask for questions on rugby. Any questions on rugby? Councillor Phillimore.
Yes, cheers, Chair. We're just looking at what we said we'd deliver and how that has now slipped to medium to long term in aspects of three items. And my question to you, Michael or Paul, is how are we going to work with Basingstoke Rugby Club, Support Overton Rugby Club and Support Chinham Rugby Club? Is that financial support or just moral support, or because I actually know the landowner of Overton Rugby Club, and yet I would have thought he'd be very difficult to deal with. Won't name any names. He was a good racing driver.
Yeah, I can come in with some of that answer, Councillor. So with Overton, it is about the lease and the landowners, and in terms of the length of it and what you can actually support them with. So we do a bit of work with RFU. We try and support there. My last speaking to the club is they didn't want to upset the apple cart, so actually for us too much, but they have just, and they are exploring options to actually extend the lease, and have currently, I believe, done some work with that. So we will open up opportunities. It just depends on the level of funding. Certainly to ourselves and RFU will be dependent on the security of tenure that you've got on the lease and the level of term on that. So that's the challenge that we particularly have with Overton. With Basingstoke Rugby Club, we work very closely with. We have an operations meeting at Downgrange, which is quarterly, and which we update and discuss different options. We've done a few things both financially, are in the report as well, and supporting in terms of pitch usage and that side of things. We do work quite closely with the RFU and linking with Russell Amos down there, who represents the rugby club. We've done some funding with Kingsclear as well with the rugby club up there, and drainage improvements, and that's ongoing. We've got another meeting in the next few weeks with those guys to go through it. Unfortunately for Chinham, they do have a probably similar issue to Overton in terms of Mays Bounty. I believe the land they lose is currently owned by Beacott. So I think actually, although they're based there, it's the length of tenure that they've got on lease agreements with how much we can fund. We did look and do some investigation work about possibly, this was a few years ago, but possibly resiting them nearer towards Chinham area. But again, a lot of the feedback from the members of the club is they quite like the location of being town-based. So again, we kind of left it open to them. If there's anything that we can assist them with, please contact us, and if anything changes. And that's the side from rugby that we are at in terms of support levels at the moment.
Councillor Vaux.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Phillimore, for talking about Overton, because I'd done no research into Overton at all, so thank you very much for that. Just starting with Chinham Rugby Club then, because I think it is interesting that it was in the original strategy as a short to medium term thing to do something about the drainage there, and it's remained as a sort of short to medium term, which just shows that something must be blocking it. So that was going to be my big question, what's blocking it? So it's the lease at Beacott, is it, that's blocking it?
Sorry, yeah, it is. There's been a few suggestions as well. The rugby club's involved with it, but there was exploration about putting an artificial grass pitch in there with Beacott as well. But ultimately, the level of investment was limited by the length of term that we would have through Beacott. I think that it's because it's almost a sublease. So Beacott leases the land to Basingstoke Sports and Social Club, and then they hire it to Chinham Tigers, which use it. So it's the level of land or the lease of time of lease that they've got between Basingstoke Sports and Social Club that limits it in terms of the investment that we can do for drainage.
Okay, so I think it's important that we have that discussion with the rugby club, because the rugby club seems to me to be baffled about why it's not happening. So I think we need to have some clarity so that we can try and get the different people around the table and try and figure out how to sort it out, because it's pretty grim up there. The other bit for the Chinham Rugby Club is that they are on that the Basingstoke Sports and Social Club, and it was in the cricket section as well as the rugby section about improving the club facilities, the showers, toilets, that building. Now, what I'm told at the moment, the showers are not working at all, which, you know, I didn't want to think about it for more than about 2 seconds, what it's like to come off the rugby pitch and not be able to have a shower. It must be pretty grim. They must be covering their cars and seats in plastic in order to go home. I don't know. But that is grim. So who do those facilities belong to? And how can we try and facilitate getting things fixed there?
Okay, it's another one. I met with the chair as well of Basingstoke Sports and Social Club just before Christmas. They have given us a list. We've got a limited amount of Section 106 funding to help them with some of those improvements. The overall picture with that site was they've come in for planning permission to do a massive redevelopment, and it was in excess of pre-COVID kind of £2.5 million. We did speak to them at the time about suggesting what's kind of a Plan B approach, if you like. And I think because of the limited ECB funding and their financial kind of strategy for the project has changed, I've only probably pre-Christmas received a list of kind of things that they would be looking to do. They obviously didn't want to spend significant amounts of money refurbishing the facility if they're intending to knock down and rebuild. And I think it's only just now that Basingstoke Sports and Social Club have probably come around to that kind of thinking. That's essentially, we are supporting them now, but again, they own the building, so we have more of a collaborative approach than actually any other.
So who owns the building, and is that owned or leased?
Yeah, I'll take that away. Obviously, the Basingstoke Sports and Social Club operate the building. In terms of land ownership and lease arrangements, we'd have to go back because it's not something that we necessarily deal with that side.
So if I could urge, Chair, that yes, the drainage of the pitch is important, but we do need to do something about the sanitary facilities in the club itself. Whatever as council that we can do to support the resolution of that, I think would be fantastic. Okay.
Sorry, can I just jump in? I think it might be worth a recommendation about getting all of the relevant stakeholders together in a room and discussing that as if it was a short-term priority and it's rolled over now into what seems more like a longer-term priority because of the length of time that's been on there. If we could get them in together, and I don't want to kind of say that this is what's going to happen, but essentially bang their heads together and sort it out so that we can address that issue going forward, if that's okay.
Yeah, we'll take that away.
Yeah, no problem, because in theory as well, I have got a list of stuff. The changing the shower provision wasn't on that list, so it'd be good to know if it's been updated. I mean, the funding we discussed with them wasn't about the showers, and I would have thought that would have been a priority, to be honest. But it would be worthwhile sitting down. Again, we did encourage them to look at local infrastructure funding when it was there, and certainly I've now given them direction to the community infrastructure funding. So there are options out there. As I say, I think before there was just a reluctancy from the club to apply for any funding because they really were pushing for the kind of brand new build and going through the ECB element for that.
And I think that comes back to the ECB's changing strategies as well, that they have to be flexible and adapt. And I think as the reality is, we've got to sustain what we've got now rather than playing big. And I think there's a bit of a reality check kicking in for a lot of people around that.
Yeah, and what we seem to have here is the ECB in charge of cricket affecting rugby, and squash and any other sport, but and football. Okay. Do you want to jump in quickly, Colin, and then I'll get
quick. I do support all that. Talking to specifically Basingstoke Sports and Social Club, which was previously cricket club, because everybody who's got a history of going back to cricket in Basingstoke knew that Hampshire county cricket was played there, and some people might like to see a return of Hampshire county cricket to Basingstoke.
Councillor Morrow.
So I had a meeting with a development officer, and he says Basingstoke's one of the top 3 priorities in Hampshire for cricket. So if there is any money, you'd hope it would come our way, but we're having more meetings, and obviously they're always on the lookout for any money that they can get their hands on. But yeah, we do sport. Just to say as well, since we got back to cricket, is I'll take away that looking into rural cricket, because if there are sites that are being underused, then we need to address that and try and encourage it, because it can be, sports can die if you don't get back into it. So yeah, I forgot to mention that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Morrow. If it is such a priority, let's get them in and talk through what that priority means. I'd like to see. I'm not an avid cricket fan, but it is in my older age a good sport to go and sit with a beer on a summer's day. So, but it also is, as Councillor Vose highlighted, it's impacting other sports now. So if we can get these people in together, if you can take the action away, and then we can really bang their heads.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the conversations that we're already having with the ECB and the ongoing meetings that we're going to have gives the opportunity to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Vose.
Thank you. I really appreciate the focus on that. I think it's really important for folks. If we could move on to Basingstoke rugby now, which is quite a conundrum, that the issue of the artificial pitch, turf, I think, in rugby terms. I think historically there was a plan and an expectation that the main pitch would be changed to an artificial turf. That's what the papers tell us, and it was unfortunately unable to be funded at the time. So for my colleagues, because this is what I've had to find out for as well, is there's a really good rugby facility down there at Downs Grange. There are 3, I think, put me right if I've got this wrong, 3 pitches and a training area, which is council-owned grass. And there is what the club call the cage, which is a fenced-in area, which is the main first-team rugby pitch, which I believe the club either own or lease or whatever, take responsibility for. And they've got a good stand, which they raise money for and put up in that caged area. So I'm not sure that the rugby club has been able to engage as effectively with the council as we might like, whether that's because there was an expectation that this kind of conversation would be happening at the Down Grange meeting that you talked about, or what has happened. I mean, I know committees change and things move on, but having had quite a few conversations with the chair their feeling is that the communication has kind of broken down. So I think we need to get that back going again. Certainly the current committee's view is that actually rugby players, the first team, they want to play on grass. That is generally the surface that they want to play on. So they want to keep the cage as turf. What they are struggling with is the quality of the training pitch, particularly because it gets waterlogged. So it's a recurring theme, I think, for rugby, for us. It must be something in the soils that we have here that they don't drain well, do they? So and what I've been having the conversation about is, okay, what quality of artificial grass would they need for the training area? So these are the discussions that we've started to have, and I think it would be really helpful if we could continue those to really flesh out where we might be able to get funding from, particularly if it's not turf that's of rugby standard, because I think that might be one of the blocks, because rugby turf, which I've learned, is artificial turf, is of a quality and a type that is very different to our 3G, 4G. It's more expensive. It's because you've got to tackle people, they've got to fall over and it mustn't kill them, basically. So if we don't need that quality, we might be able to come up with something that might be more multi-sport functionality that could be shared with other sports, something that made it more affordable, that we might be able to get other funding streams into. So I think that opens up a different kind of conversation that I think we should be having with Basingstoke Rugby Football Club. Because their proposal would be, their training would be touch rugby, the kids, lots of women and girls rugby going on down there as well at the moment. It's a really flourishing club for all age groups, even old folks. And I think, you know, we could do something there. They would do their tackling training on the grass, but so it would be no tackling on this if we could get something going on that. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah, so I think if I can catch up with you after, then yeah, we absolutely want to have the conversations. So we can certainly carry on having the conversations there in terms of what the art of the possible and looking at that. I can't make any promises this evening on what is possible, but certainly we can have the conversations to get a better understanding of the need.
Can we make sure that the conversation is not just with Councillor Vo, it's with the rugby club? Yeah.
Yeah, my apologies. With the club.
I'm sure Councillor Vo's got a very keen interest now in artificial grass or rugby pitches, but yeah, going forward it's not going to be much use. Councillor Morrie, you do want to come back?
Yeah, no, it's very important that we have those conversations and that we get the details right. We don't want to be spending money twice, so that's very important. Also, I think we've got multi-sport artificial pitches coming, haven't we? I'll save the pool.
No problem. I'll try not to bore you too much, but it's about the surface type and development and the shot pad underneath. So there is now more emphasis through things like the Football Foundation funding about having multi-use elements to it, and that is something that they are looking at, shared with the RFU. Multiple sports don't always lend themselves, so there's different surface types. Actually, rugby and football you can on the rubber crumb type surface. It's only the shot pad underneath. Obviously, it's a bigger shot pad for the safety reasons of contact sports with rugby. But we are looking at funding strategies for it. So things have changed a little bit. Back in 2016, we sat all the resident clubs down to come up with the wider downgrade strategy, of which there was to increase an extra artificial grass hockey pitch, which we've done and completed, to refurbish the athletics track and introduce a stand area down there, which has also just recently been completed. And the third stage was the rugby club. At the time, the rugby club wanted the cage pitch to be done because actually at the time you could play matches. Part of RFU and funding, we have to be a bit conscious of that will be a big tick box for them. Obviously, with things like the weather and cancelled fixtures, part of the big reason why all the national governing bodies fund artificial grass pitches is so that you can guarantee that the number of matches are played within the season and not called off. So therefore they sometimes don't invest in smaller size training elements, they'll invest in the full size pitches to accommodate match fixtures. But obviously you can train on a full size pitch as well from that. I think the rugby club's ambitions have changed slightly, and I think they would like it located next to the pitch. We obviously have got other things to go. We'd have to do amendments to planning and that kind of stuff. But until the funding was in place, we haven't really kind of gone down the overall amendment projects to it. So it's something we're looking to explore. And as Councillor Morris says, Football Foundation and Sport England have now introduced the kind of multi-sport element to it. So as long as we can look at some football usage and track that kind of element, that will bring in some external investment potentially.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so I'm not an expert, but when I did some research into the RFU, it's actually really difficult to get funding from them. And what I'm told by the rugby club is that if they do put money in, they want ownership. So it actually is quite complicated. So I do think we do need to sit down and really understand it and get representation from the RFU probably there as well in order to really understand what the options are. And I think other elements of it are I think about grounds maintenance. I mean, the pitches that we own, I think there are sometimes some communication issues around when they're playable and when they're not playable. So I think this is an area again that I think is a recurring theme also with netball and other areas. I think our grounds maintenance teams do a fantastic job with our sports facilities. I don't think our residents understand how much time our estates people do. I mean, I know there's tennis courts that they're maintaining, as well as netball courts and rugby pitches and football pitches, and it's absolutely amazing what they do. But I think sometimes we have a comms issue there about when our estates team, I think it's not playable, but actually it is. And I think we need to do something about that too. If we could put that on our agenda when we meet, I think that would be really helpful to get some better lines of communication going in that kind of area. And I also wanted to be very positive about the work that has gone on to improve the clubhouse. I think there's been some work on the changing facilities and other things there, which the club were very appreciative of. I think we had some Section 106 money that went in there. So, the club's very appreciative of what the council's doing, but I think we've got to a point now where we need to sit down and just rethink what it is the club wants to do in Downgrange. As you've said, if they're the next phase of it, that would be fantastic, because I think it would be really, really welcome. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. If you could, take it away. Some really good comment and questions there. I will just, I think back when I was a teenager, rugby was a big thing in Basingstoke. I may have dropped off the scene in terms of following it in Basingstoke, but we certainly did have, I'll do a shameless plug for my brother who was friends with Tom Rees, who's the former England player, so that's come up through Basingstoke. So we need to develop this for the children for the future, really. Okay, on to netball then, and I apologise to those that do play netball in Basingstoke. I actually didn't realise how much participation there was until, as I mentioned to officers yesterday, I stumbled across a netball competition going on in Russell Howard Park, and there was quite a few people there that I wasn't aware of that was taking part. So I will try to take more interest in this sport in Basingstoke. But any questions then on netball? Councillor Slimin?
Yeah. Surprise, surprise, I haven't spoken already about other things. Cricket, we have at AWE mainly, because we haven't even got a cricket team in Dudley. Rugby, obviously the rugby club is on the other side of the border in West Berkshire, but is mentioned, Tadley Tiger, so we've covered that. But netball, I know that there are people who organise the netball locally that live in my area and would have preferred at one point to have had some local netball pitches up in our area, and we tried to accommodate them when we did the partnership that presented Barlows Park, but of course we only got money for football, so hence why we haven't got it. And a number of people always question why we've concentrated on one sport, and they don't always realise it's because where the money comes from, what you get, because if a certain group will provide you with some cash, that's what you get when you haven't got others. And it's quite noticeable that we've actually put all our eggs in one basket in the centre of Basingstoke. So if you're in the rural community, I know some of the schools do netball, and presumably there are netball pitches, netball courts, sorry. I used to play netball, sorry, it's a court, out in the rural communities. But whether or not they're ever available for people who don't want to travel to Basingstoke or can't, because transport isn't always that easy for people out in the sticks, and we know the bus service is limited. So again, looking at whether or not there is more a scope of working with our schools who have these courts to allow people who perhaps don't want to come to Basingstoke or can't come to Basingstoke to have a starter for 10, and maybe, then if they get into the leagues, they might go and find a way to get to Basingstoke, or there may be some support to get people there. So I think we've put our eggs in one basket, and Russell Howard obviously seems to be quite an active and well looked after and well used facility. But again, I think we are not spreading the word out to people who are in other places that can't necessarily access it. I wonder what your thoughts were.
So yeah, I'm happy to discuss it in terms of definitely with the school engagement elements. I agree. The Hurst over there would be. We have invested in the multi-use games area at the field gate in Kingsclear. So in terms of rural, not too far from there. And actually, part of the premise that we did then, we had a netball group, so we made sure that the surface was conducive to rugby, netball, and football. So it's a sandress pitch. So actually, if you wanted to hire it from a community point of view, then daytime access, you could utilise the outdoor court at the field gate. I think it's probably right in terms of what we own and ownership, and maybe there'd be some direction to things like what we have available for hire, because that will be included on our website from that side, and also Howard Park. But you're right in terms of the engagement element to link in with the schools, because they are valuable facilities where we can in rural.
Just to add to that, it does talk about the strategy, about, you're quite right, grassroots, where do we start? About back to netball, or walking netball. So I think they're the sort of things we could probably look to explore. And as you say, as they mature, or that the better players find their way to clubs and then can find a more competitive structure at Russell Howard, which is sort of games every night, 3 or 4 games is a very busy league. So yeah, I think it's in the strategy to reflect that, so we can take that away and see what scope there is to actually expand the development of the sport in other areas.
Is there any way that can be incorporated into the strategy as well going forward?
Well, I think the thing is the strategies are based on evidence of need. So I think it's really important when we undertake things like the LNRA that any of the clubs in the area are actually engaging with that process, because that's how we get the voice and the aspiration into the strategies. So that's why we do go out to as many clubs as we do, and that's an important part of the process.
These clubs don't exist in the rural areas if there aren't places to play. So I know that particularly, I will mention her, there's a lady called Brenda Watson who lives in Tadley and who came to us and tried to get local facilities of netball up at Barlows Park when we did it quite a few years ago now. So if there won't be, it's a chicken and egg situation. You won't get a team unless they've got somewhere to play. So obviously those teams that set up and become leagues are all now concentrating on being in the Basingstoke area because they know that's where they can play. So what I would like to think is that we actually look in at the grassroots of encouraging, just as we encourage people to play football, play rugby, play cricket, start somewhere. You know, first thing they're not going to do is say, oh, I want to play netball in the league. They might just want to go and play informal netball somewhere. I know in Tadley we've got a mugger, which we produced. Town council paid for that. And there is basketball, or people could potentially play netball on that court as well. But it won't be a formal thing, and therefore they won't have been consulted, because who do they know to go and ask? I mean, you can't blame a consultant because they don't know everything. So again, it's just trying to perhaps go out there and see if there are places where people would like to play netball, and then potentially go around and see if the schools would allow them to use it on an informal basis. Maybe something, as you say, in the newspaper that goes out through the doors to every home, you know, looking for people who might want to do, like they do informal cricket in Basingstoke, might want to do informal netball.
If you've got any contact details that you can share with me, that would be helpful, and we will pick that up with whichever contacts you can give us.
Councillor Vo?
Thank you. Before we look at sort of strategy for netball, could we deal with the big issue, which is the lights? Disaster is what I would say, just so that members understand the situation with the lights at Russell Howard Park. My understanding is that they were moved to LED lights, I think September 2022. So there are 6 courts down at Russell Howard, and there are 6 light pylons each side. And, well, when I went down on Monday night, there were only 4 that were working fully. 7, only half of the light was working. So they've got 2 panels that stick out, so 1 panel not working. And one of them wasn't working at all. You know, if it wasn't for the fact that netball has a really good big ball, you wouldn't be able to see to play. You know, you've got 6 courts there, all these matches wanting to be played. One had to be cancelled because they literally couldn't see on that court. The other 5 they were playing, but none of those courts had full light. None of them. So I understand it's really complicated and it's very awkward and it's difficult, but what can we do to get them back lit? Thank you.
I did pick this up with colleagues. My understanding is that the issue now is they've got the parts, it's getting the labour to go in and install it, and I believe that is looking to happen around the end of January. Originally it was due to be done at the end of November. Unfortunately that didn't play out. The contractor appointed, so they've had to go back and find somewhere else to go in and make that happen. So my understanding is it should happen, because the 2 ladies tonight who kindly come along, we did have a chat about that earlier, so I provide some reassurance that we are working hard to get that sorted out.
Okay, so it would be fantastic if it's sorted at the end of January, because September 2022 to January 2024 is a very long time for these lights not to have been working. I think the other issue is that the LED lights, whether it's the design or whatever, when they are going off, they flicker. And that causes health issues for some folk. You know, we can't play people underneath lights if they start to flicker, if they have health issues which could trigger epilepsy or other issues. So it's an unusual, I've not heard of flickering LED lights like this before. I mean, I play tennis under LED quite a bit. They either go out or they're on. They don't tend to do that flickering thing. So I don't know if it's part of the design, but please could we keep an eye on that and record if the netball folk report back that that's happening, because we might need to think about the design if those lights are not the right sort of lights in some way. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely, and we will make sure that we're in contact with the club so we can get some feedback on the new lights, which we will hope will be in by the end of January.
And I mean, thank you to the netball clubs for their patience and their perseverance and continuing to play, you know, because there's so many people that want to play. It's just really, really sad if they can't because of the lights. So moving to the strategy bit, because it does say in the paper about Russell Howard Park being a sort of strategic hub for netball. And what I didn't quite understand is what that really meant, because talking to the folk that are playing netball, that club, Basingstoke Netball Club, has been there for 60 years. It must be one of the oldest clubs in Basingstoke. And that's a long time. And I think, you know, however many years ago, 40, 50 years ago, I think our facilities would have been considered to be really, really good. You know, when those courts were put in, I gather they were tennis and netball at one point, and then Memorial Park came into being and it became solely netball. But I think the rest of the world in netball has moved on and we've stayed pretty well the same. So, you know, if we wanted to be seen, and we should aspire to be a performance netball area, you know, is that what you mean by saying we want to be a strategic hub, or am I misunderstanding what this paper is suggesting?
Well, I think, again, it's down to the evidence of need in the borough. And we're back to that thing of the challenge that we're going to have moving forward is funding. So I think that we will continue, if we can continue to have some conversations around the aspirations for that area, then that's something that we can start feeding into our conversations around the facilities there. But I can't pretend that money is going to be forthcoming. We need to go out and find that money.
Sorry, Jenny, can I just jump in? I mean, you talk about aspirations in that area. Are we talking about in the area of Russell Howard or in the area of netball? Because the way I see it, we've got a club that's been there for 60 years, as you say, Councillor Vogt. Basingstoke has clearly got a big presence of netball, and yet it's got 6 outdoor courts. And I mean, personally, I don't know what the indoor facility would be like to take a league forward, you know, where they've got covered facilities. Is that aspirational in terms of netball? Could we be looking at that, or is it just aspirations for Russell Howard?
No, so I think it's a combination of the two. I think it's understanding what is the aspirations of the people that are using those facilities, so that we can then look at how do we try to meet that need, how do we try and attract the funding, what does that requirement look like, where does it need to be placed.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, 2 seconds, Councillor Morrow.
Just say that it's great. We can't put these aspirations in a perfect list because it's always a moving picture. Where does the housing get built? Where's the funding available? So, you know, we've got an aspiration to support the netball, but things have to happen for us to be able to do it. So just to be clear, you can't have that clean, precise list. We're definitely going to do this at this point in time. This is above this, because different sporting bodies are going to come to us at different times. So,
thank you.
Yeah, if I could just say again, it's not, Helen, I'm not trying to put something in the strategy that isn't there. It says about Basingstoke being a strategic hub for netball. So that's why I'm asking what that means, because another part of the strategy is saying about, as part of the school, I can't remember the precise wording, something to do with the schools programme, to look to build 6 indoor netball courts. So, and, you know, and that was my question, is that part of Manydown or is that part of somewhere?
Sorry, so I'll pick up that. In terms of it being a strategic hub, it's because there's 6 courts in one specific area that are designated for netball. The other elements, and it is mentioned and picked up a little bit in the LRNA, which is the school usage as well. So we know Everest also have one court, but I think it's 1 court, possibly 2 now. And then there's also the multi-use elements to things. So as Councillor Lee said about sports halls, they're not just exclusive for netball. That's why the premise that they're designed on for badminton court, because obviously the sustainability modelling, it means by having 4 badminton courts, you can obviously play badminton, netball, basketball, indoor football. So actually it lends itself to being sustainable. However, the strategic hub is because that is 6 designated ones specifically for netball, and it's the kind of flagship netball facility, if that makes sense.
So when you talk about the 6 indoor, what do you mean?
So I think it's making reference to 6 indoor badminton courts, which will also accommodate netball in terms of the sizing of it. And there is a proposal for badminton courts on Manydown for an indoor hall, and that is the kind of reference to actually look to whether or not we can utilise something that's potentially coming forward to accommodate the kind of need. But again, it will be 6 badminton courts, not 6 netball court size, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to know where they were, whether they're going to be. I mean, the idea that they would be dedicated netball, I mean, I get that that's not likely to happen, but the point is that they would be there and indoor, because what I'm being told is finding indoor training facilities for the netball teams is really, really difficult. They use a lot of schools, school halls and facilities, but they're very, very slippery underfoot because, you know, they get a lot of use. The kids are going in and out, but whatever. So going into something that would be a sports hall and therefore the surface would be maintained for sports, I think would be much, much better. It would be safer for the netball teams for their practice, because they're looking, particularly in the winter, they're looking for indoor practice areas. So again, I think it would be, I know that we said this for rugby, but I just think that for netball, I think we're at a bit of a cusp here for netball, because what I hear in very short conversations that I've had with people who very kindly come tonight and have talked to me on social media about netball, is that it feels that we're at a point where we either have to find ways of supporting netball to move forward, or I think it's going to it's not moving. You know, we're not getting the young people coming up and in. That's what I'm hearing. Other netball clubs and teams in other areas are getting more support and more help. I also appreciate there's less national funding for netball. You know, I know that pretty well everything that's happened at Russell Howard has come through the council, and thank you very much for that. I think we need to really make sure that we understand that it's either come from developer contributions or from the council. It's not come from Netball England or whatever. So, we need to find out if we can aspire to be a performance site, whether we would then attract some funding, and that might help us move forward. So I would like to propose, Chair, if we could put together another one of these meetings, I'm sorry, where we can get the netball movers and shakers together with officers and yourself, Councillor, and any other people that we think might help, to be able to say, okay, what is possible for us? What would the netball folk like to achieve, but also what is the art of the possible, because obviously we can't do things that are not possible. But then I think we would get an understanding, a shared understanding of what's possible.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm happy to take that as well, if officers can take that away and look into. Councillor Phillimore, I know you've been patiently waiting.
Yes, Chair, and I know very little about netball, but the girls at the back probably know loads. But is it the fact that netball is played at Russell Howard? It's not the home of Basingstoke, specifically Basingstoke Netball Club as well. Is it because all the competitive matches are played there in the league, where it's a floodlit facility? Because I know that Overton had or has a netball team that have to come into town. So when we're talking about aspirations and facilities, that might be a deeper conversation. And I know we've got a budget that's can afford all this stuff, but I think we have a sport here that is Basingstoke centric.
Do you want to respond to any of that? Or?
It's an interesting one because where I live, there is a netball hub around the corner, 6 courts, and it's rammed at weekends, and it's rammed on the Tuesday and Thursday night. And I think now they've got a social night as well. I think it's quite similar to the Basingstoke League model. So the tendency is that they organise the referees, they organise the matches, they organise the fixtures and everything else. So you turn up en masse knowing that you're going to play twice against 2 teams in the 3 hours that you're there, what have you, as opposed to trying to arrange a one-off fixture against another team to meet at a certain destination. And the other thing that does is it allows teams to share players or share referees or something else. So it kind of lends itself to be self-fulfilling in that respect. So I think we probably just need to explore a bit more about this gap between, okay, we've got that, and we probably sat on our laurels thinking it's all taken care of, thank you very much, and whether or not there is something further afield that we just cast our eye on, and whether or not that's something that we need to pick up and reflect. And I think it's that informal, formal bit again, and how do we reconcile that in the going forward. Yeah, so.
And to me, what you say there about people coming to one place and they get to play 2 games, is that a product of the fact that we've got a hub of 6 courts, and that's what happens? If we only did that with football, if we had 6 pitches, everyone would turn up at the right place at the right time, play each other, and then disappear. But if we had courts in Overton, in Tadley, in the more rural locations, would we be facilitating something that we're currently not?
So yeah, that is exactly the problem that you have with hub sites, is obviously accessibility. So by putting it in one space, then obviously you've got everybody else that has to travel around to it. But I do think it's worth adding, say, Overton to the list that we were talking about, similar to Tadley, and what the offering is at Testbourne School, and whether or not there's an opportunity to explore, because as far as I'm aware, they've got netball courts, they've certainly got sports halls as well, and just maybe to get some more tangible data of what they are doing to open up those facilities.
That'd be good, yeah. Councillor Vay?
Just a couple of small little things which you, one, I'm sure you can help with. The signage, it is improving the signage. It is a recurrent theme. It was in the previous to-do list, and it's moved forward to the current to-do list. So what's the block on that? And secondly, when I went on Monday night, and it was pointed out to me as well as my own observation, is people park in that car park up by Boots, and there are other pharmacies up there. It's a busy car park. It has no lighting, and I can understand why it hasn't. Is that a car park that the borough owns or somebody else? Because the white lines are non-existent now, and actually in the dark, it is really, really difficult to see where to park, and I wondered if we could do anything to help with that.
I can certainly take that away in terms of ownership as well. It does serve Howell Park Bowls Club and Thornycroft as well from that side. I think it's probably going back to historically and when these facilities were possibly designed. They've obviously the design elements have picked up far more, and it's something they probably would have picked up in terms of designing access to the facilities, lighting. I know, for example, the tree line, they don't now tend to want to put them by tree lines, whereas originally they were put in because of light overspill. Whereas the development between LEDs and light overspill, and also the problem with the trees is obviously you get tree sap and branches, leaves falling onto them. So they've tended to, the modern ones are designed slightly away from tree lines, whereas this one is probably a bit of a product of an old design element to it. But it is something that we will pick up in terms of ownership and if there's anything we could do with lighting. In terms of signage, we do quite often find issues with antisocial behaviour with signage, so it's a bit of an ongoing, put it up, gets taken down, so that's the reason why we've kind of left it in a little bit. It is periodically done, and it's just continual because unfortunately that is something that we do suffer a little bit with antisocial behaviour at all our kind of public access sites, if that makes sense.
So just for clarity, we put signs in and then we had to take them away, or we've not put the signs up?
No, we put them up over periods. They've just been damaged or vandalised, so then we have to go and redo it again each time, which is why, from a strategy point of view, if we put it in 5 years ago, the chances are when we go back and do another audit in 5 years, there's no signage, if that makes sense.
That really is a rolling activity on the plan.
Okay, thank you. In terms of some of these actions and you know, the short to medium term needs, do we monitor or track them in any I know KPIs is going to mention it, but do we monitor and track the delivery against these so that we can actually check how they're progressing?
Yes, we do an annual review with Sport England and the national governing bodies, and then obviously this 5-year update, there is an appendix section which actually details all the things that have been achieved. And that's where it's slightly difficult, because obviously they're removed from the kind of existing 2015 or the current 2015, but we have included them as an appendix so that people can actually see what has been achieved in the 5 years.
Okay, thank you. So is there any further comments, questions? I think we've had quite a bit of both questions and debate on all three of those. I am going to use again my chair's prerogative. There we do have some members from various different sports. Is there anything in terms of what we've discussed tonight, any questions or comments that you would like to add if you want to step forward? If not, you're more than welcome to email them in to us or speak to Councillor Vaux seems to be your point of contact. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, and just thank you to everyone that's come down tonight to listen in. Yes, please do. Thank you very much. And just for the benefit of anyone that was at home wondering why it went silent, it was just a comment from Basingstoke Rugby Club around making sure that they do sit down and talk about succession planning, and that the grounds is a priority. I'm a big advocate. Just what you said, sir, about youth development across all sports, I think, is important, especially as Basingstoke has been and should continue to be, known for its youth development into senior sports. So that'll be really good if we can take forward. Okay, I think we have had a good discussion on that. We've provided some feedback and certainly got some recommendations and some actions going forward. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. There is no other action to note the report, but yes, thank you very much. And Kerry, Councillor Morris, sorry.
Just wanted to thank all the members for their input tonight. I think it's been really positive, and it's all been like having sport at heart, which is brilliant. So thanks for all the members' input. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks to the public. Okay, so item 7 then on the agenda is just a review of the work programme. I don't know if you've seen any update. Yesterday, was it yesterday? It wasn't. It was Monday, was it? Monday we had the chairs and vice chairs meeting with officers. We are going to look at, in March, the community safety priorities and the new policing model. So CSPOs, PCSOs and the police in to discuss community policing and how we can influence and shape that going forward as ward members. In June, hopefully you will all be coming back after the elections. We will have the Integrated Care Board and HCC to identify any impacts or opportunities for the council for BDBC and the wellbeing strategy, and then to get a progress on implementing the climate change and air quality strategy. So looking for members' feedback on that. In July, there is going to be a motion going to full council around the ice rink. Just so I'm expecting something to come forward on that in July to the committee, and one on BVA, which Councillor Golding, you were talking about whether we've keeping up with the service level agreements, and so that will come in July. And then to be confirmed, I've asked that the recycling and waste changes do come to this committee. Scrutiny were going to look at something, but it's more to do with the scrutiny of the issues that they had. This is to do with the new contract that's going to come forward, and then biodiversity. Plus, we did have 2 work programme forms from Councillor Compton Burnett, which I'm going to take away with Fiona and other officers to look into how we can bring that forward. But they are noted, so thank you very much. Is there anything else then that anybody would like added? Councillor Foy.
Chair, do we want to reflect at all about the discussion about sports tonight, and whether, because I haven't looked to see what the other sports were, whether members would be minded to look at any other sports, because these were the ones that I just felt would be quite interesting, but I do feel that other members might prefer to bring something else.
Okay, so would members like to look at any further sports? If that is the case, go on, Councillor Howard.
Thanks. Just general provision of indoor sports facilities, because I was thinking, I used to live in Reading, and they've got 3, maybe 4 large leisure centres that are multi-use, have lots of indoor space for various sports, and I can't think of anything in Basingstoke that really comes close to being that multifunctional. There's a few spaces that can be used for that, but they're often schools and colleges. There's nothing purpose built, so obviously that's a massive cost. So unless we've got 20 or 30 million squirreled away somewhere for that purpose, it's probably not going to happen. It'd be nice to have a conversation about it. For things like, you've got indoor football combined with badminton courts, combined with tennis courts, combined with basketball courts, all in the same space, and then you've got curtains that can be drawn across to offer space for like fencing and martial arts and so on. So yeah, some.
Yeah. I mean, we do have it in the sports centre hall. I don't know how much that ties in with what you were thinking, Councillor Compton Burnett, in terms of that golden thread through all of the policies. Yeah. Sure.
What we've been doing this evening is the playing pitch strategy, which I think is LRNA part 3. And then my work programme suggestions were essentially, could we look through part 1, which is the built facilities, and part 2, which is the community buildings, please. So what you've just asked for fits beautifully into part 1. And maybe if we could cover off the rest of part 3, which is what you were saying and what Councillor Phillimore was saying, do the rest of the sports and the playing pitch strategy, then we've done everything and everybody's happy.
Yep, that's fine. So I can, I think football's clearly one. We have had some comments, I know, a lot on social media, and I've had casework on football for youth in the town centre specifically. So we can look at football, and are you just happy for me to pick another 2 sports and we can go forward on that?
I'm just wondering about picking piecemeal, because the LRNA covers all the sports, almost all the sports. Would it not be better just to go through them all? Because otherwise we'll miss somebody and it just doesn't seem fair. We may as well, it won't take very long to cover the smaller ones and to do the martial arts and that sort of thing as well.
Yes, we can, but I think we spent an hour on 3 sports, and I'm just conscious that might end up taking a large proportion of time. Maybe I could propose then that it goes forward as a task and finish group, and you all, dig into the detail, the weeds itself, if that's something that the committee might be minded to do.
If I could say, I think that we should bring here issues that we think, areas that we think we have something that needs to be explored. That's the purpose of scrutiny. I did pick the sports that came this evening because I felt there were aspects of them that warranted looking at. I think football is an area that warrants looking at. Looking through the others, it's football, cricket, rugby, hockey, bowling, tennis, netball, croquet, petanque and disc golf. They're in one area. I'm not aware of any of the other areas requiring scrutiny, but I could be wrong. I agree football. And we talked about it, didn't we? We thought it might be too big. And so therefore, I think maybe if we focus on football alone.
Yeah, happy to focus on. I mean, there's quite a few teams within, and it is a big topic. I mean, one thing that is missing for my liking is ice hockey. There's no mention of it anywhere really, and it was the biggest watched sport in Basingstoke at a point. So.
My comment to that is I did ask about ice hockey, and the response was that the LRNA is a pretty well, this is what we have to do, and ice hockey isn't one of the sports that we are required to do.
Okay, so we'll bring forward football onto another committee meeting. Councillor Carr, you've got a...
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just a point of clarification about your proposals for July. You mentioned a motion coming forwards to full council in July on the ice rink. The council meeting is on the 18th of July and our committee is on the 17th. So I wondered if you clarify the choreography around that point.
I certainly can, yeah. So there'll be a motion in February, and the expectation is that work will come in July. Any other questions? Any other work programme suggestions? No? Okay. There's no need to have an exclusion of the press and public, so I believe that is it for the evening. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening and safe travels home.